It's 2 p.m. now. We're going to start with our 8th learning session. Just a quick logistic notes for those Spanish speakers or English speakers that want to use the interpretation services. You can make use of it. It's a button that is in between the Q&A and the apps button on the lower part of the screen. You will have to select the language that you want to listen the training on. With this small logistical note, please, I just pass the floor to our panelists who will conduct session 8 of this SDG Learning Center. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you very much, Pelayo. Greetings, everyone. Greetings for this session on SDG Learning Session number 8, sharing solutions for SDG financing and knowledge, research, and community participation for sustainable recovery, planning, and transformation. My name is Milind Premshikar. I will be serving as the coordinator of this session on behalf of our partners who are organizing this session. So this session is composed of 3 parts: sharing solutions with the SDG financing, as you see on the left side, the knowledge, research, and indigenous knowledge infrastructure, which is on the right side, the community participation on the left side, and then the sustainable recovery, planning, and transformation. So as I mentioned before, the session is organized by CANES, UNDESA, Colombia Department of National Development of Planning, UN Office of Outer Space Affairs, FILAC, which is a fund for Latin America and Caribbean countries for indigenous people, and AJESH, which is based in Cameroon. So on behalf of all the co-organizers, I would like to welcome you for this session. This is one of the very comprehensive and unique opportunity for you to participate and learn from the different opportunities being offered by the 3 parts of this session. The opening remarks will include the objective, the scope, and the expected outcome from the session. I would provide you. Before that, I'd like to invite and welcome Mr. Amson Simbada, Chief of the National Strategies and Capacity Building for the Division of Sustainable Development at UNDESA. Mr. Simbada, I'd like to invite and welcome you. Mr. Simbada, are you there?
So this is Sammy Ark at Milan.
Yes.
I suggest you proceed with the objectives and scope, okay. And then I will make sure that Amson will join us at the, momentarily.
No problem.
Thank you.
So let me begin with the objective. So my name is Milind Premshikar again, just to provide you. I am the chairman of CANES. And as I said, I will be serving as a coordinator of this session on behalf of all the co-organizers. So the objective, scope, and the expected outcome for this combined 3 parts, as I mentioned before, covers the first part, which is the roadmap for developing an SDG financing strategy, which is based on the Colombian case study jointly with the UNDP. This will be presented and moderated by the National Development of Planning of Colombia with the UNDP. This will be followed by the Indigenous Knowledge Research Infrastructure, or IKRI, a very unique platform being created for the Sustainable Development Goal, and will be complemented by our colleague from UNDESA and ECLAC on how this is being addressed for the sustainable planning and transformation, especially for the Caribbean countries. Then the part 3 objectives are the community participation for sustainable recovery and planning. This will be presented and coordinated by our partner Ajesh, based in Cameroon. And finally, we would be having the discussion on what the outcome from this session at the end of this session. So this objectives for each of the part. The first part, as I said, will present the participants what are the financing strategies, what are the lessons learned, and what the steps involved. So this part will be covered in terms of the issue 1 and issue 2. The second part will have the objective is to educate the participants about, to learn what is the ICRI, Indigenous Knowledge Research Infrastructure, and how you participants stakeholders can join this initiative. The third part, you will hear about how the sustainable recovery planning in the Caribbean region. And then finally, you will learn how involve the communities and engage into this participation process. So the scope of this is covered into, each of this part is covered into different issues. So the first part, we have 2 issues. The first one is learning the approach for the SDG financial strategies. And the second issue would be the actual frameworks for the SDG implementation. In the second part, there are again 2 issues. The first issue is the ICRI's challenges, opportunities, and the research case studies, how we compile, process, and analyze this indigenous knowledge, especially from the research community in Philippines. So this will be the case study. In the half of this part would also again cover from the Caribbean countries, how the lessons learned from the COVID-19 and the nations, how they can plan and create this strategy based on those lessons learned. And finally, in the third part, again, there will be 3 issues that will be addressed by the partner from the Ajesh. Finally, the outcome. So what we expect to accomplish or what you expect to learn from all of you. In the first part, you will have an opportunity to apply this strategy. At the end of this session, we are hoping that you will have enough knowledge and training from this session to apply this strategy to your own countries on using this integrated approach for the SDG financing. We are also hoping that you will be able to participate in the Indigenous Knowledge Research Infrastructure and join as a stakeholder and understand how it can be useful for your community or for your country. Then you will again get the capacity or actual tools on how the nations can use this approach of design, adopt, and implement the recovery plans and policies. And finally, we are hoping that basically you will learn the mechanisms and steps involved into the community participation. So these are the 4 outcomes that we expect at the end of this session. So I would like to begin the first part. Before I begin the first part, I would like to see if we can have our welcome or our opening speaker in place.
Yes, Meland, actually, Amson is ready to speak to us right now.
So before we begin our first part of this session, I'd like to invite our opening speaker, Mr. Amson Sibada from UNDESA. Mr. Sibada, the floor is for you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me well now.
Yes, perfectly well.
Yes.
Thank you. Distinguished participants, government representatives, and national stakeholders, United Nations colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege and pleasure to welcome you all to this session on sharing solutions, SDG financing, and knowledge, research, and community participation for sustainable recovery, planning, and transformation that is being held during the 2022 High-Level Political Forum. I'm very glad to join the SDG Learning Session 8 partners and welcome you on behalf of UNDESA and ECLAC project team. During this session, my colleagues Semi Arekat and Abdullahi Abdul Kadri will present in part 2 of the session on best practices and lessons learned in sustainable recovery planning in the Caribbean small island developing states. and share the experience of UNDESA and ECLA cooperation in the Caribbean region in partnership with governments of the participating Caribbean states and working on strengthening the sustainable recovery planning and decision-making capacity of the national stakeholders in the project's pilot countries. Like other countries around the world, the COVID-19 pandemic has had a negative impact on the health, social, and economic well-being of Caribbean small island developing states. Most Caribbean small island developing states are small open economies and are vulnerable to external shocks in the global economy, extreme weather events, and climate change. The COVID-19 pandemic has triggered a socioeconomic crisis, which is impacting lives and livelihoods. The uncertainty regarding the future costs and impact of the pandemic threatens economic and social development, as illustrated by rising inflation and continued supply chain disruptions around the world. Addressing these challenges will require integrated and green recovery planning to support sustained recovery, resilience, and transformation. Recovery plans should encompass promoting decent job creation, the formalization and growth of micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, universal healthcare, quality education, universal social protection, promoting the empowerment of people living in poverty, women and girls, as well as people living in vulnerable situations, and protecting the environment. Through a sustainable and green recovery from the COVID-19 crisis, governments have an unprecedented opportunity to steer transformations towards more resilient and sustainable economies and societies and move forward in a better direction. It is therefore critical that countries accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals in this decade of action and delivery. I wish this session of the SDG Learning, Training, and Practice at the United Nations 2022 High-Level Political Forum a great success. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sibanda. It's, as you stated very well, the objective and hopefully this session should help us get to those objectives that or the outcome that we mentioned in our expected session outcome. So now I'd like to invite Ms. Valentina Botero, advisor to SDG Group at DNP, to moderate part number 1, which is the roadmap for developing an SDG financing strategy, Colombian case study. Valentina, floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this session. My name is Valentina Botero, and I'm part of the SDG team at the National Planning Department of Colombia. And today I will be moderating this conversation. Today we are going to talk about the Colombia's roadmap for developing an SDG financing strategy. And to start, I would like to share, well, this is my bio, and I would like to share the questions that we have for today. So Leah, if you can help me with that, the question that we are going to show you and for you to participate is, which ones are the characteristics that you consider must have a financing strategy for the SDGs? So yeah, we are going to give some seconds for the people to answer. So I'm going to read some of the answers that we have. The options: integrate different budget sources, count with a sustainability mechanism, be including a legal planning instrument, or all of above. So I think everybody has participated now.
Wait, maybe another 30 seconds.
Okay, we can give more seconds.
Allow participants. I think we have enough.
Okay, I think we can, yeah.
Results.
Yeah, so can I give the answer now?
Yes, you have the results in front of you. So it's about 35% is the last. Then there is
Yeah, so the correct answer is all of the above. So everybody was, or most of the people was correct about that. And the idea is that in the following conferences, you are going to deepen in all these subjects about the financing strategy. So how, Leah, can you stop the poll or share the results? Okay. I'm going to close the window, yeah? Okay, so to start, I'm going to present you to Mr. Daniel Gomez, who is the Technical Vice President of Productivity, Competition, Entrepreneurship, and Business Demography from the Private Council here in Colombia. And we invite him because his perspective is key to deepen in the contribution of private sector to compliance the SDG. So, Daniel.
Good morning, afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. Indeed, I'm currently the Vice President of the Private Competitiveness Council in Colombia. The Private Competitiveness Council is part of our national competitiveness system, which is it's a very interesting institution in Colombia that allows for a structured dialogue and structured work between the private sector and the public sector. And this is particularly useful when we think about achieving SDG goals and coordinating different types of actions which are of the essence of reaching SDG goals. I recently also served as the Deputy Director of the National Planning Department. So I think that I have the ability to try to convey the importance of working jointly between the public and the private sector to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals and the goals in the 2030 Agenda. First of all, I'd like to mention how Colombia incorporated the SDG goals in its medium-term and long-term planning instruments. We have the National Development Plan, which is constructed every 4 years by the government taking office. We are in the midst of a change in government in Colombia, so we will again see go through the exercise of the National Development Plan. But National Development Plan since 2018 at least, after the SDGs were agreed and after they were incorporated in our planning instruments, have been tracked and matched with our National Development Plan goals and instruments. The second instrument is our long-term compass instruments, the National Council on Planning, which is the maximum authority in Colombia for development and policy planning, where we incorporated SDGs in a long-term instrument in 2018. And these instruments are instruments that have to be observed by the following governments. They have to be continued. They articulate a set of actions. And for SDGs, this work was particularly important. SDGs require necessarily an holistic approach where the public sector, international development cooperation, the private sector articulate under a single globally agreed approach. The Colombian government, with support from the United Nations and its integrated national financing framework strategy, has implemented tools to strengthen this alignment with the private sector to the SDGs. The sustainable development is now part as well of the Private Competitiveness Council framework for assessing competitiveness. And all these tools incorporate and include things like the SDG Investors Map, the SDG Corporate Tracker, and more recently, the Development Finance Assessment. The financing framework project for SDGs in Colombia is therefore a medium-term strategy focused on accelerating the implementation of SDGs. One of the main objectives is to support the national government in defining the financing and resource mobilization model from different sources, public and private, to fulfill our goals in 2030. The framework includes, and part of the results of the framework in this period have been, one, mapping the public and private investments with a gender approach and identification of accelerators to close gender gaps, evidence-based budget toolkit to guide budget decisions with a gender perspective, estimation of contributions of the public sector to goals selected in the SDGs at times achieved through a budget alignment and inference policy priorities methodologies. This is very important. I think it's super important, and in Colombia we have to move. We have space yet to move in terms of a budget flexibility. So we have all the tools. I'm not sure we have all the flexibility needed to get all our buck from our investments in these instruments. And finally, we have a dashboard with results of the alignments of the SDGs in the general budget for 2020-2022, and we hope that this will continue with the next administration. To conclude, I think that it's very important to mention how the private sector is a key stakeholder for achieving SDGs. All of these are tools and strategies that the private sector needs to understand. The private sector has to have the ability to track its own investments and to understand what the potential impact of its investments in each of the SDGs are, and also to monetize all these investments in terms of private sector returns. We know that these have immense social returns, but we need to align social returns with private returns in order to generate the incentives for the private sector to continue investing and to continue mobilizing resources towards the achievements of the SDGs. Colombia, I think, has demonstrated that there are scalable pilots of blended finance that can serve as clear examples of the potential of blended finance to jointly achieve between the private sector and the government the national development goals aligned with our international commitments. So very important to have the goals incorporated in public policy, to have the tools for the private and the public sector to monitor, to evaluate, to be able to assess investments. And finally, this should result in the mobilization of resources from the public sector, from the private sector, and from the international community towards achieving SDGs. So Colombia, I think, is a very nice example for the international community to assess each of these three components that I mentioned. Thank you very much.
In mute. Thank you very much, Danielle. I think your intervention is key because for us, private sector is very important in the implementation of SDGs. And now to continue with this roadmap, I'd like to introduce to you Ms. Olga Romero. She is the Director of Monitoring and Evaluation of Public Policies from the National Planning Department of Colombia, and she's going to give us an overview of Colombia's approach to an SDG financial strategy and showing us how Colombia has managed to mobilize sources and actors. So.
Thank you, Valentina, and good morning, good afternoon to all. Thank you for joining this SDG learning session. I'm going to tell you a little bit then of what we have been doing in Colombia. Daniel gave us a very good introduction in terms of what we have been doing in Colombia, but also the importance of this interaction between the public and the private sector. So I'm going to give you a more detail, and then we are going to go through with UNDP, which is who they are going to give us more detail on the integrated financial framework. So if you want the next one, please. So I'm going to give you more detail on how is the framework in Colombia, the SDG framework implementation, what progress we have been doing in terms of the advance on the 2030 agenda, and the integrated national financial framework in a little bit of an introduction to then give the word to UNDP. The next one. So in Colombia, we have a high-level SDG commission that was created in 2015 by decree. For the Ministry of Planning is part of this high-level commission, also the Ministry of Finance, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Social Prosperity Department, the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development, the Presidency, and the National Statistics Department. And within the National Planning Department, we have the Technical Secretary of this high-level SDG Commission in the direction of monitoring and evaluation of public policies. This high-level commission is now interacting with this multi-stakeholder platform that we just launched, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more in a second. If you want the next one. And something very important and that Danielle mentioned is that we have a policy document that is our guide on how to implement the SDGs in the country. This policy document has four strategies. The first one is to have a follow-up scheme. The second one is to strengthen statistical information. The third one is to have a strategy in the subnational level. And the fourth, to have a non-governmental stakeholder engagement. So I'm going to tell you a little bit how we have advanced in each of these strategies. If you go to the next one. So in terms of the monitoring and information, last year we presented in the high-level political forum the third national voluntary report. We have also published 4 monitoring reports, and we have also engaged in having more information. We have 30 new indicators to measure that advance in the SDGs, and we have our webpage where we can find this progress towards the SDGs. The next one, in terms of the subnational strategy, we created an SDG model at the territorial level for the formulation of the territorial development plans. We also have a guide to voluntary local reports so that local entities can present the reports on the advances in the SDG agenda. And we also carry out an analysis of how the SDGs were included in the last territorial development plans. The next one. Also, in terms of the non-governmental stakeholder engagement, we have advanced in the SDG corporate tracker. This is a tool that we have developed with the UNDP and the GRI to measure the contribution of the private sector to the SDGs. We already have more than 600 companies registered and more than 340 companies reporting how is their contribution to the SDGs. The next one, we also just launched this multi-stakeholder platform. We created this also doing with the OECD some peer learning strategies. Can you go to the previous one? Valentina, please. This one. We have worked with the OECD in this peer learning activity where we learn the best practices on how to create this multi-stakeholder platform. We already have 2 sessions of this multi-stakeholder platform that we launched recently, and it's created by 2 entities, one national and one local from the government, 2 entities from the private sector, 2 entities from civil society, 2 entities from international organizations, 2 entities from academy, and 1 member of the parliament. And then the next one, and which is the one that we're going to be focused on this session, is that we have been working in the project of integrated national financial framework in Colombia. This strategy is going to help us do a diagnosis of what we have in terms of finance, and then develop a strategy of financing the SDGs in the country so that we can evolve into advancing in those SDGs. If you go to the next one, please. This is the progress of the SDGs that we have to the moment with, for December 2020. We have advanced in 72% with respect to the target, to the last target. And in terms of the 2030 targets, we have advanced in a 54%. That give us that we have to continue improving in advancing in the SDGs, and that's where there's a space on thinking of this strategy, financial strategy. If you go to the next one. So these are the main challenges in the implementation of the SDGs that we have. The first one is the inclusion of the SDGs in the next National Development Plan. As Daniel was mentioning, we are in a transition of government, so it's important that those SDGs are included in the next National Development Plan. We also have to improve our measurement of the advance of the SDGs and inclusion of new indicators. Also to have a toolbox for implementation and closing the territorial gaps. To have the sustainability of this multi-stakeholder platform that we just launched, to have the SDG corporate tracker product strengthening it, and definition of this SDG integrated financial strategy. So if you go to the next one, I just want to give you a little highlight of how the budget construction in Colombia works. We have instruments in terms of policy and financial and budgeting for the short term and the long term. So in the short term, we have for public policy, the National Development Plan, and in the long term, we have this policy document that we have of how to achieve the SDGs in 2030. In the financial, we also have some short-term instruments, and we have a longer-term instruments that allow us to decide which is the best financial strategy. And then in terms of the budget, we also have some short-term and long-term instruments. So in that scenario, if you go to the next one, Vale, I'm going to give you a brief introduction of this integrated national financial framework. Then I'm going to give the word to Mauricio from UNDP, which is he's going to give us more detail on what we have been developing. But basically, the first step of this project was to do an assessment and a diagnosis of what we had in the country in terms of financing the SDGs, then thinking about this strategy, this financing strategy, which is going to require later this monitoring and review of these financing strategies that we develop, and some governance and coordination. So this is the process that we are on, and I'm going to give Mauricio the floor so he can give us more detail. Thank you.
Yes, Olga, thank you. Thank you very much for your intervention. And yes, as Olga said, we are going to give the word to Mauricio to deepening the National Financing Framework. Mauricio is the coordinator of the Integrated National Financing Framework for Sustainable Development here in Colombia. And he's going to talk about the lessons learned and the design of the SDGs National Funding Strategy in the country. So, Mauricio.
Valentina, Olga, and colleagues. As my colleagues just mentioned, Colombia is doing a great job in approaching the financing of the SDGs. This is a strategy, obviously, that United Nations is supporting countries worldwide. And in Colombia, what the UN office through participating agencies are doing is supporting the national government in a roadmap for an SDG financing strategy. This strategy so far has been thought in terms of 5 sections. The first one is We want to jointly build a diagnosis that tells us what are the main conclusions from what we have done in the past 2 years in terms of SDG financing, all the assessment that has been done with the national government with regards to SDG financing from all sources, all financing sources. Then a second component within that strategy would be able to pinpoint the specific elements or the long-term priority bets that Colombia has in the long term. That will be followed by an SDG costing strategy in terms of once you adopt and prioritize a few specific topics, then you need to make sure that you do the SDG costing for those specific goals or prioritized goals, right? So that's the third step that will be included in the SDG roadmap for financing strategy. And the fourth section that we are planning on supporting the government with is how, more specifically with regards to the financing aspect, and is how are we going to finance those specific bets and those financing gaps that we are able to identify through the INFF. So what we're thinking about in this latter step is actually thinking about how we can deploy innovative finance mechanisms, including blended finance, to make sure that there is a credible approach to the financing of the development prioritized, the prioritized themes. And finally, on the fifth section, what we are thinking about is laying out in more specific terms how is the SDG financing strategy going to be monitored from here to the timeline that we set. Obviously, being the SDGs, we are thinking about 2030. But in terms of development needs, we're going to need more than that, obviously, to make sure that we reach all the prioritized development goals, right? Even the country now is drafting strategies for 2050. So in that regard, what we need to make sure is that we have monitoring mechanisms for all the financing from here until the timing arrives for those prioritized bets. A second message that I want to start here with is that that strategy that we have been discussing with the government will very likely have 18 components. Among them will be an integrated monitoring of flows. We will have an indicator, an SDG indicator diagnosis to make sure that we have a roadmap on how to strengthen the local monitoring of SDG and their financing. We will have also a section, as I mentioned before, of SDG costing. We want to make sure that we are able to cost or have some financial scenarios on how much, using obviously different methodologies, different topics will cost. The financing strategy will also include a gender strategy as well as a blended finance strategy. Climate finance obviously is one of the major topics of sustainable agendas everywhere. So we want to make sure that we have that component as well as the topics related to SDG localization, which means basically how we can land those national approaches to SDG financing on the local level. And finally, and also very relevant, is how to develop a private sector strategy that will facilitate the reaching or achieving those SDG goals. A third message that I want to mention on this slide is that UNDP and UNDESA have a checklist to support countries in drafting their financing strategy. So I want to make sure that our colleagues know, in other countries, know that there is support in order to come up with this financing strategy. And so UNDP and UNDESA have a checklist that will measure things such as, which tools will it address in public policy? Like in every country, there is a toolbox of planning components. So the idea is to determine or incentivize countries to think about which tools is the financing strategy going to address, which SDG themes are being prioritized by the government, and to make sure that the strategy is different than existing mechanisms, given that we're talking about an SDG umbrella that covers most development topics, right? So what Colombia is trying to do with support from the UN in this regard is to draft a strategy that will mix three options that were provided by the development finance assessment that was done in Colombia in the past year and a half. So these development finance assessment led to three options for the government. In one option, the assessment says, okay, there needs to be there could be a continued alignment, SDG alignment of development flows, which we have been doing so far with the national budget, as well as the some other resources, development cooperation, private sector. So we could continue and strengthen that SDG alignment to make sure that the country has a clear picture of where it will go. Then it provided the option of prioritizing just a few needs, right? If, for instance, in some other countries there have been specific prioritized themes, usually related to climate, but also to social or social protection. And there is also another option of aiming at a larger portfolio of reforms. So what we will do in Colombia, hopefully in the next few months, with support from the government, is to make sure that we draft a strategy that combines all those elements. We want to make sure that we continue SDG alignment of all development flows, as well as we identify which are going to be the prioritized development bets and the portfolio of reforms. If we go to the next one, Valentina, this is just a puzzle of the 18 elements or ingredients that we want to include in the financing strategy. I will not go over the details of each one, but basically I want to make sure that I read some of them. I mentioned that blended finance will be an important component of Colombia's SDG financing strategy, as well as a component related to international development cooperation, fiscal reforms, and topics related to public financial management. Also, some topics related to climate finance. And so this is the current puzzle that we are currently discussing with the government. What we are trying to figure out are actually the size of each piece. We're trying to find out which pieces are going to be more important, or rather more extensive, or need more work. So if we go to the next one, just to emphasize the point that I mentioned at the beginning, UNDP and DESA have clear guidelines or checklists to support country officials and stakeholders to make sure, also civil society, to make sure that the SDG financing strategy covers all aspects that are needed in terms of an SDG strategy, right? So as I mentioned, these guidelines want to make sure that the country is taking into account an integrated approach for the monitoring of financing, that it differs or it's different from existing strategies, to make sure that it's really a holistic approach to SDGs. And so if we go to the next one, this is a picture of the development flows that we have been able to map so far. In green are the topics which are related to local resources or internal resources, basically the national budget, national public budget. We have been doing an SDG alignment of those. Basically, that means we have, with support from the government, been able to come up jointly with a SDG budget tag for 3 fiscal years. And we're trying to work or move towards the private side of development flows, which are here on the red circle. So what we're trying to do is to determine how much SDG alignment these flows have in order for the future, in the short term, medium term, through the financing strategy, make sure that we are aligning, and that's the second part of the graph, to specific SDGs, also using the costing, which will lead to financing gaps, the identification of financing gaps. If we go to the next one, please, we'll see these three options that we mentioned that we're trying to, that the government of Colombia is trying to mix. The first one will be basically some priorities, high-level priorities that will be defined through the next National Development Plan. We think that it could be related to environment, migrants could have a component of that, something related to equality and leaving no one behind. So those are the things that excuse me, could be included in the short term. There is also a portfolio of reforms that we have identified through different assessments, as well as the alignment that I just mentioned in the previous slide. So if we go to the next one, there are some risks in the roadmap, and we believe that other countries that want to approach the drafting of an SDG financing strategy should take into account. And they're mostly related to basically is the project management of the financing strategy, right? What are the timings? What are the risks in terms of timings or the legal approach that the country will have for its financing strategy, as well as other institutional rigidities that might be needed to take into account, as well as how is the decision making going to be. If we go to the next one, I know we are short on time. We have 15 lessons that we have learned about financing for development in Colombia and related to SDG financing. I will not go over all of these, but I just want to make sure that we have learned some lessons that are going to be key in the SDG financing strategy. And we were able to come up with these 15 lessons learned about financing for development through 2 years of looking at the SDG financing in Colombia, right? Taking the photograph together with the government of current SDG financing, we were able to see, for instance, that for every $33 for every $1 that the development cooperation brings into the country, the national budget is investing in SDGs around $33 extra, right? Currently, we see that there is approximately an 86% of national budget that is aligned to SDGs. So that is an important amount. And so these are the kind of lessons learned that we have been able to gather. Also, we have been looking at some quantitative simulations between budgets and achievement of SDGs. And we have seen so far that approximately 43% of SDG indicators will reach their goals by 2030. So that is definitely a warning sign that we should be working very significantly in the next few years to make sure that we increase or we take different actions to make sure that we achieve SDGs towards 2030. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mauricio. We hope that with these interventions, you will have an approach of Colombia's SDG financing strategy. As you say, we are short of time, so I'm going to give the word again to Mr. Milindi for the next topic.
Yes, thank you very much, Valentina. Thank you for this very interesting contribution from the National Development Planning of Colombia and the UNDP. What we learned from this SDG financing and those framework, I'm sure this is something we can now complement with the next part of this program, which is the indigenous knowledge, research infrastructure, and the sustainable recovery planning and the transformation. Now, this part is, as I said, organized by CANES, FILAC, which is the Fund for Latin America, Indigenous Communities of Latin America and Caribbean, United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, and then the UNDESA and ECLAC. So I would like to sorry about this. So I would like to begin the second part first by okay. First part would be covering this indigenous knowledge research infrastructure, and then would be followed by the second issue. So the first issue I would be moderating here. We have the distinguished panelist, Dr. Mirna Cunningham, who is the Vice President of PHILAC and the UN spokesperson for SDG 10. Then we will have Dr. Shirish Ravan from UNOSA. He will provide the brief introduction about this IKRI and how participants can join this initiative. He will also pose a polling question to participants to get the feedback from participants. This will be followed by Professor Marquesa Reyes from the Asian Institute of Management, and she will present how we capture the indigenous knowledge and the case study, especially from Philippines. Then we will have the honor of the president of the Network of the Youth from Latin America, Ms. Jessica Vega. And then finally, Mr. Gabriel Mue, who is the technical secretary of PHILAC, will present the challenges and the thoughts of moving forward with IKRI. So I'd like to invite first Dr. Mirna Cunningham to address the issues in terms of she's been the champion advocating creation of this IKRI initiative. She has been for the UN Food System Summit when this initiative was launched. She was the advisory board member of this UN Food System Summit. And I would like to welcome and invite Dr. Mirna Cunningham. Mirna, please.
Muchas gracias. Muchas gracias, Milin. Muchas gracias a todos los participantes y organizadores de esta actividad. Les saludo desde mi pueblo, el pueblo Misquito de Nicaragua, desde la región autónoma de la costa caribe norte de Nicaragua. Y les saludo también en nombre del Consejo Directivo del Fondo para el Desarrollo de Pueblos Indígenas de América Latina y el Caribe. Este evento de aprendizaje realmente nos tiene que recordar la enorme capacidad de resiliencia, transformación y estrategias de sostenibilidad que los pueblos indígenas hemos venido implementando a lo largo de nuestra historia. Los pueblos indígenas actualmente experimentan amenazas sobre sus vidas, sus territorios y recursos. Amenazan sus conocimientos y prácticas tradicionales y no respetan en la mayoría de nuestros países la visión de desarrollo que tienen los pueblos indígenas. No se aplica el consentimiento previo, libre e informado que permita realmente que las estrategias de recuperación cuenten con su participación. Definitivamente, la inclusión de los conocimientos y las prácticas de los pueblos indígenas, sus sistemas de conocimiento en la tecnología que se requiera para la recuperación es fundamental. En este sentido, es fundamental que se cuente con salvaguardas fundamentales en todo proceso de recuperación que partan del enfoque de derechos humanos individuales y colectivos de los pueblos indígenas, que incorporen su visión de buen vivir, su visión de desarrollo, basada en esa relación íntima que tienen entre los seres humanos, la naturaleza y los otros seres que comparten estas sus territorios. La historia definitivamente parte precisamente de que necesitamos incorporar entonces estos conocimientos en los procesos globales. Y hemos visto que en los últimos años ha habido un incremento en el reconocimiento en procesos globales de estos conocimientos. Los acuerdos de París, por ejemplo, crean la plataforma de conocimientos de pueblos indígenas y comunidades locales como un instrumento central para enfrentar el cambio climático. Pero también vemos los importantes debates que se están dando alrededor de la biodiversidad. Y diversos estudios no han podido generar evidencias que demuestran que en los territorios ocupados, controlados por pueblos indígenas, se recupera y se mantiene la biodiversidad. Y esto no sucede en territorios en donde ellos no tienen el control. Ahora, sabemos que para la recuperación post-COVID, la tecnología accesible para todos los seres humanos es fundamental. Y entendemos que para aplicar la tecnología es fundamental analizar las implicaciones. Sabemos que la inteligencia artificial va a definir mucho de la recuperación y sabemos que la desigualdad y las relaciones de poder que hay en lo que se refiere a inteligencia artificial, tecnología y distintos sectores de la población es un tema que debemos de abordar. Y por eso FILAC ha hecho una asociación con Caneus, con UNOSA, para crear este repositorio de conocimientos tradicionales de los pueblos indígenas, porque consideramos que es fundamental estos conocimientos para la recuperación. Sin embargo, es fundamental que se aborden y se manejen desde un enfoque de derechos humanos, desde una estrategia que fortalezca el sentido de apropiación y contribuya al empoderamiento de los pueblos indígenas. En este sentido, esto que denominamos ICRI, que es este repositorio de conocimientos tradicionales, lo que busca es contribuir realmente a la aplicación de los ODS desde un enfoque de derechos humanos, desde un enfoque de respeto a estos conocimientos, desde un enfoque que contribuya al diálogo intercientífico, el diálogo entre estos conocimientos tradicionales de nuestros pueblos que han demostrado que contribuyen realmente a proteger la naturaleza, a garantizar una vida con dignidad, con la tecnología moderna. Esto es lo que estamos trabajando desde el ICRI y consideramos que para alcanzar la Agenda 2030 y generar un ambiente de confianza genuina, un ambiente de mayor coordinación, es importante este diálogo transparente e incluyente entre los portadores de los conocimientos tradicionales y las organizaciones que trabajan la inteligencia artificial y trabajan la tecnología moderna, para que efectivamente a través de la reciprocidad podamos efectivamente contribuir a la recuperación post-COVID. Hemos señalado siempre que será fundamental que los gobiernos tomen en cuenta que sin la participación de los pueblos indígenas no va a haber recuperación post-COVID efectiva. Se seguirá aplicando nuevamente un modelo económico de exclusión Y eso es lo que queremos nosotros desde el ICRI, lograr un enfoque de derechos humanos que permita realmente la participación plena, efectiva, respetuosa de todos los distintos sectores. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cunningham. You've always been inspiration for the entire community, and we look forward to the building this knowledge infrastructure with your guidance. Now I'd like to invite our colleague, Dr. Shirish Ravan from the UNOSA, United Nations Office of Outer Space Affairs, to present about the ICRI and to get some feedback from the participants. So Shirish, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Milind. And thank you, Mirna. You have set a very good context of what is Indigenous Knowledge Research Infrastructure. We call it ICRI. So I will just get into a little bit details of that and at what stage we are currently in developing this Indigenous Knowledge Research Infrastructure. So, and after the couple of my slides, I will be asking one question to get feedback from all the participants. So, so I would like to explain this. This Indigenous Knowledge Research Infrastructure aims at developing a global, collaborative, multidisciplinary, and integrated platform. And it's a digital platform, and that will be developed using public and private partnership. It will leverage the power of Earth observation, space technologies, and also modern technologies like artificial intelligence or machine learning or so for capturing the knowledge that has been scattered worldwide among different indigenous communities, and that we have not tapped the potential of that knowledge truly. So therefore, this is one global effort or umbrella effort that will really help capturing the indigenous knowledge and bridge all the stakeholders. Next one. So we started this initiative sometimes in 2021 with the United Nations Science, Technology and Innovation Forum. And then the major point came when Secretary General of United Nations launched a global dialogue on United Nations Food System Summit. And this is where we truly found the potential of ICRI because, the Food System Summit that aims at really transforming the way we produce, consume, the food, and zero hunger is the one important SDG that needs to be taken care of through food system. And this is where we found that there is a lot that indigenous knowledge can contribute in providing sustainable food systems. There are a lot of those varieties, the practices around food system that has not been tapped and it has not come into the mainstream. And then we have used many other forums like Science Technology Forum. Then a month back, myself and Milind, we were in a global platform for disaster risk reduction in Bali. That's where we also demonstrated potential of ICRI in building disaster resilience. So we have been in the various forum trying to present this ICRI. Next one. So what we are trying to do is it's a structured framework that we are trying to develop, and we would like to have partnership with a lot of stakeholders that would like to leverage the power of indigenous knowledge, and we want to make sure that this knowledge will primarily benefit the indigenous people. Of course, they should have the ownership and their interests are protected. That is one important component of this particular ICRI. And also it will stimulate collaboration between disaster management authorities or the stakeholders of sustainable development. And yes, the major benefit should go to indigenous communities. Next, please. So what I would like to mention here is that currently we are at planning stage. And planning stage includes basically how the indigenous knowledge research infrastructure look like. What are the technologies that we will use for developing this? What are the policy issues on this? And then what services this indigenous knowledge research infrastructure can provide, and who are the users, end users, who are the stakeholders, who are the data providers. So entire architect has to be developed, the system study that has to be developed. So currently we are at stage and we are trying to see if we can master this particular planning in one particular country and check all these questions that I just posed here, and then it can get into implementation stage. So this is we are at this stage, and we are looking forward to more partnership for this. So with this, I would like to ask a question, because our interest is to build the partnerships. So what is your key interest as a stakeholder in indigenous knowledge research infrastructure? So I think we will give a couple of seconds for answering these questions, and we'll see the results. So
we can initiate the polling question, please. Leah? Yes, thank you.
So what you see here is a polling question. What is your key interest as a stakeholder in indigenous knowledge research infrastructure? Whether you would like to contribute as a research and development, a stakeholder, or as a donor, or as an end user, or technology provider. There's a great role that technology plays in building such infrastructure, because you see knowledge has been scattered in many places and we need to really collect it and generate the new knowledge as well, or any other. So you can click the question and we will view the results. That will help us basically to understand who are the major stakeholders in this particular development of ICRI.
Very interesting to observe, Shirish. At least we have, interest from all the diverse communities here, including from the donor.
Exactly.
As well as the end user. Yeah, these are the major key components: the end user, the technology providers, and especially the donors. And the research and development community can then really make use of this facility. So we can wrap up in 15 seconds, Shirish.
Yeah, but I don't see the results, so I don't.
Have results on the screen.
Do you see? I don't see. Yeah.
Yeah, the results are on the screen.
Okay. Anyway, I don't see the results, but maybe you have summarized it. I don't see it here.
Okay, so those who are unable to see the results, let me read the.
Now I see.
Okay.
Yes.
Sure.
Right. So yes. So what we see is the larger interest. 64% comes from research and development community, and I think it is expected that yes, there are a lot of efforts happening in various places, but these are scattered efforts, and these needs to be brought together. So research development has the biggest component to it. And yes, we are looking for donor, and this is where we have much less, 4%, and this is the major constraint. We are talking of SDG financing, and ICRI also needs really financing to implement this particular program. So this is where we really lack, this is the constraint that we are facing. End users also needs to be strengthened, because people truly do not know potential of indigenous knowledge. I think we need to do this. This is great feedback that we will need to do little more work on how end users can understand how ICRI can really benefit the mainstream food systems or accelerating progress of SDGs. Technology providers, yes, seems at good condition. Yes, thank you. And the other we could not capture because of limit what exactly you would like to say, but you can put your answers in the chat box. What do you mean by other? So thank you, and over to you, Milind.
Thank you so much, Shirish. Now, with this introduction of ICRI and what has been spelled out by Dr. Meghna Cunningham, I'd like to invite now our colleague, Professor Marquez Arias. She's at the Asian Institute of Management in Philippines, and very interesting work which is going on in terms of how to capture, how to engage the indigenous communities. So I would like to invite Dr. Marquez Arias to discuss and present how to this process that we are proposing, capturing indigenous knowledge, and how to engage the indigenous communities to create this infrastructure. Dr. Marqueza, please.
Thank you very much, Milind. So I'd like to thank Canus and all the organizers for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity. And hello to all the participants in this session. So As mentioned, I would like to present to you some part of our work that is ongoing right now at our institute, the Asian Institute of Management, where I teach. So for the first part of my slide presentation, I would just like to give you a brief background on the policy and legal frameworks that govern indigenous knowledge in the Philippines, particularly. So, but let me just say that the Sendai framework actually calls for a holistic indigenous disaster risk reduction research, because the Sendai framework actually acknowledges that indigenous knowledge systems and practices strengthen the resilience of indigenous peoples and reduce their vulnerabilities to disaster, particularly arising from natural hazards. However, for the Philippines, there's already a law, and this is called the Disaster Reduction and Management Act, that was passed 14 years ago in 2010, that already provides the assurance that disaster risk reduction and climate change measures should be gender responsive and sensitive to indigenous knowledge systems and respectful of human rights. And rightly so, because in the Philippines, there are 110 major indigenous peoples or indigenous cultural communities. And as you can see on the map, they're scattered all over the archipelago. And most of these communities actually depend on traditional Sweden agriculture, utilizing available upland areas. And therefore, prior to this Disasters Reduction Management Act, there was already an IPRA law, or the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act law, passed in 1997, that actually provides the protection of the rights of the indigenous peoples in the country. And this was also emphasized by Dr. Cunningham in her introductory remarks. But at the same way that the law promotes and protects the rights of IPs, the law also recognizes their responsibilities to preserve, restore, and maintain a balanced ecology according to the law in the ancestral domain, by protecting the flora and fauna, the biodiversity, watershed areas, and other reserves, etc., etc. So this actually, the laws and legal the policies and legal frameworks actually already acknowledged for a long time the intertwined responsibility and rights of indigenous peoples between what they're doing, their systems and practices, and the land where they live in, which is what we call ancestral domain. However, due to prevailing development and economic growth approaches, environmental degradation, disasters, such as there was a Pinatubo eruption, we call it Mount Pinatubo. It's a volcano here in northern Luzon back in 1991, which erupted and affected and displaced the Aitas, the indigenous peoples of Aitas. And this is what the study is focusing on. So all of these disasters and climate change impacts actually affect the resilience of indigenous peoples right now. So in that sense, we are trying to capture the indigenous knowledge systems and practices of this particular indigenous peoples, the Aitas in northern Luzon, particularly those who have been displaced by the Mount Pinatubo eruption in 1991. And they have been actually living among the lowland communities around the volcano. And we want to capture in this study their IK systems and practices, and these are defined accordingly by the National Commission on Indigenous Peoples, or NCIP, which is tasked to implement the IPRA law. Next bullet, please. So as I mentioned, the IKSPs are very much linked to the ancestral domain, which is the natural capital of indigenous people. So their culture and livelihoods are very deeply rooted in their ancestral domain. So each indigenous community actually have their own IKSPs and have their own they have their own relationships with their ancestral domain as their natural capital. So ancestral domain means all the land and waters and coastal areas and natural resources that belong or have been occupied by the Atis here in the Philippines. To capture this IK systems and practices related to increasing their socioeconomic resilience, so particularly for disaster reduction and climate change adaptation of the selected IP community, namely the ITES, which have been displaced by the Mount Pinatubo eruption. We are undertaking this study, so I am the research mentor of several students of mine in our master's program in disasters management, and I have approved the methodology for primary data collection. So they have their secondary data collection, but the primary data collection is what's important, because these are the collection activities, data collection activities that will interact directly with the indigenous peoples. And these are participant observation and key informants interviews. And so in undertaking this research activities, we have to be very cognizant of the research ethical considerations. Aside from our own ethics, research ethics at the Institute, we are also acknowledging and cognizant of the laws and the policies that I have mentioned in the beginning. So we have already secured the permission from the IP community that we are focusing on before any of this study has been started. So as required by the NCIP. And we're also going to, this is already in the works, a cultural sensitivity briefing from the NCIP regional office in that particular area to respect the cultural norms, traditions, and values of the IP community in question before any data gathering activity starts. And we are also acknowledging the IP community as the knowledge owners and engage them in all stages of the research through various means. So we are doing regular consultation sessions from data validation to the approval of the collected data to be used in the study. So they're part of each and every step. And of course, we are sharing the intellectual property rights for all the research outputs of the project. And lastly, we are hiring a research assistant who will also act as the interpreter from the IP community, who will then be included as a co-author in all of this research outputs. So this is already ongoing, this study and all these activities, and I would like to stop here. I hope that you have learned something from my talk. Thank you so much, Milind.
Thank you so much, Dr. Marqueza. This has been one of the most important components of this creation of this IKRI. And especially as you mentioned, and I'd like to inform the participants that we are proposing some brainstorming meetings in different regions of the world. And Dr. Marqueza has offered to host the meeting at the Asian Institute of Technology, Asian Institute of Management for the Asia, this region, APEC region, as well as from the others. So we look forward to working with you, Dr. Marqueza. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Now I'd like to invite Ms. Jessica Vega, who is the president of the Network of Indigenous Youth of Latin America and the Caribbean. Jessica has been the champion of this youth community, but she also was the on the Food System Summit as well as with the FAO. So Jessica brings a very unique perspective how the youth community is involved and should be part of this effort. Jessica, please.
Yubadi Quindo está y saludos hermanos y hermanas. Agradezco el día de hoy por las buenas energías, por todo este espacio de diálogo entre las instituciones, las y los participantes el día de hoy. Ha sido muy interesante poder escuchar a todos en relación al avance de ICRI, en relación al avance de todo el trabajo colectivo e intergeneracional, justamente escuchando las palabras de las y los mayores como la doctora Mirna, ha venido a mi pensamiento como parte del proceso de las juventudes indígenas, todo el esfuerzo que se está logrando y se está haciendo para las futuras generaciones. Uno de los temas fundamentales en el tema de la investigación, pero también de los conocimientos tradicionales y colectivos de las comunidades y de los pueblos indígenas que por generaciones se ha mantenido a lo largo de muchas generaciones atrás. Ha sido fundamental porque el día de hoy podemos las juventudes convivir con esta parte de las nuevas tecnologías, con esto que mencionaba la doctora en relación a el nuevo conocimiento, a este tema de la inteligencia artificial, que ha sido una parte fundamental en el tema de esta emergencia sobre el tema del COVID, pero también en relación a los nuevos paradigmas y las nuevas propuestas de solución en relación a la Agenda 2030 y poder avanzar en una discusión incluyente en donde este tema, donde las juventudes hemos estado conviviendo en relación a estas nuevas tecnologías, pero también al conocimiento ancestral, al conocimiento que también es ciencia dentro de nuestros pueblos, ha permitido avanzar en poder proponer una mejor forma de trabajo en el tema de los derechos humanos, pero también dentro de los derechos del medio ambiente. El cambio climático es una de las preocupaciones para las juventudes indígenas y también las problemáticas que esto puede desencadenar, como lo mencionaban anteriormente, el tema de la soberanía alimentaria, la buena nutrición en relación al tema del año pasado con la cumbre de los sistemas alimentarios. Hemos podido ver que necesitamos pensamientos holísticos en donde puedan también contemplar a las juventudes indígenas, porque son las nuevas generaciones las que tenemos que ser parte de este proceso para que asimismo las juventudes, la adolescencia y la niñez indígena pueda tener un nuevo avance en relación a este tema de trabajo en soluciones y buenas prácticas. Por ello, desde la Red de Jóvenes Indígenas de América Latina hemos buscado integrar dentro de algunos proyectos como en el FILAC, donde en este año se pudieron apoyar a 10 proyectos de jóvenes indígenas que trabajan temas de acciones para las comunidades como medio ambiente, soberanía alimentaria, salud, medicina ancestral y la recuperación de nuestras identidades. Hemos podido avanzar en decir que los fondos, que los donadores, que las y los hermanos indígenas han permitido abrir dentro de los espacios internacionales son un mecanismo de buena práctica. Y este espacio de investigación, este espacio en donde podemos dialogar y tener este conocimiento colectivo de las, digamos, nuevas tecnologías, pero también el conocimiento ancestral, nos permitirá buenas soluciones en poder encaminar a las metas y cumplimientos de los objetivos del desarrollo sostenible. Seguimos invitando e instando a los diferentes mecanismos, a las agencias y a los estados, a que podamos trabajar en colectivo desde una perspectiva intercultural. Desde las juventudes indígenas de la Vía Yala, Dishabu por estas palabras el día de hoy. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Jessica. We look forward to your continued participation moving forward. So now I'd like to invite Mr. Gabriel Mue, the FILAC Technical Secretary, and who is really energizing and driving these efforts from the technical perspective. Mr. Mue, for you.
Muchas gracias, estimado Milín. Un saludo al doctor Chiri, a nuestra vicepresidenta Mirna Cúnigan, a Jessica, a los compatriotas del primer panel de Colombia. Un saludo fraternal y a todos los participantes en esta sesión del día de hoy. Quisiera iniciar diciendo que el FILAC es un organismo intergubernamental con el que ya llevamos 30 años de vida y trabajo institucional. Es un organismo de carácter paritario. Esto quiere decir que las instancias de gobernanza máxima, que es la Asamblea General y su segunda instancia, consejo directivo y el mismo comité ejecutivo. Está integrado por representantes de los gobiernos de los 22 países que hacen parte de este organismo, como también de los representantes de los pueblos indígenas de América Latina y el Caribe. En ese sentido, para nosotros como FILAC, iniciativas como el ICRI, en la que nos hemos articulado con UNOSA, con Caneos y otras organizaciones que se han ido sumando, es muy importante la visión y la participación efectiva de los pueblos indígenas en este proceso. De acuerdo a informaciones oficiales que tenemos, el foro permanente en su sesión del año 2021 ha dicho o ha dejado claro que a nivel del mundo el 80% de la diversidad biológica lo mantienen, lo poseen los pueblos indígenas. Si hablamos de objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, este dato es muy importante. A nivel de América Latina, el FILAC, junto con FAO, adelantó un estudio sobre bosques y territorios indígenas, y según datos que tenemos de este estudio que ha sido publicado en marzo del año pasado, el 20% del territorio de América Latina es territorio indígena, en donde están los recursos de la biodiversidad, los recursos mineroenergéticos y, por supuesto, allí están los conocimientos milenarios relacionados con los recursos genéticos, los recursos de la biodiversidad, que son base para el desarrollo. Así que en esta línea, el día 6 de julio pasado tuvimos un evento similar, un evento paralelo en el marco del foro político de ODS, y escuchábamos distintos aportes. Y ya nuestra vicepresidenta Mirna lo anotaba al final de su intervención. No es posible, creemos nosotros como FILAC y también como pueblos indígenas, que se pueda garantizar adecuadamente la implementación de las ODS sin la participación indígena. En los pueblos indígenas poseen conocimientos milenarios, técnicos y científicos que siguen vivos y están allí, y hay que ponerlos digamos, al servicio de la humanidad y al servicio de los pueblos indígenas en buen sentido, en un marco de diálogo intercultural, en un marco de diálogo intercientífico. Y en ese sentido, el ICRI, que ha sido una iniciativa que el año pasado, o casi un año, en el marco de la cumbre de sistemas alimentarios, logramos concretarlos. Creemos nosotros que puede ser un buen instrumento, un buen mecanismo, por una parte para fortalecer, en el marco de lo que ya nuestra vicepresidenta Mirna lo planteó, de fortalecer esos conocimientos, de ponerlos en diálogo para buscar soluciones a tantos problemas que la humanidad entera está afrontando, cuyo objetivo es las ODS y la Agenda 2030. Es lograr la solución a temas centrales de crisis climática, de agotamiento de biodiversidad, de agotamiento de la seguridad alimentaria en el planeta, y bueno, tantos problemas que tenemos. Pero para que el ICRI sea efectivo, como está previsto, es fundamental, y es un tema que está pendiente, que tenemos que juntos con Caneos, con UNOSA y otros organismos tratar de resolver, y es la participación efectiva de los pueblos indígenas. Y en ese sentido ya hemos venido planteando y tenemos que definir próximamente las agendas a las que todos estamos invitados, es adelantar reuniones con representantes de los pueblos indígenas en las 7 regiones del mundo. empezando por la región de América Latina, donde estamos ubicados y donde tiene jurisdicción de trabajo institucional el FILAC. Creemos que si esto logramos una efectiva participación, vamos a tener respaldo y legitimidad como ICRI, vamos a poder articular los distintos esfuerzos y estamos seguros que esto va a ser efectivo, va a ser una efectiva contribución para que las ODS, en la que, entre otras cosas, hay que decirlo claramente, los pueblos indígenas, sus conocimientos, sus aportes quedaron excluidos. Solamente en el artículo 10, en el objetivo 17, como ustedes saben, se menciona la parte cultural de forma genérica, pero no la participación directa de los pueblos indígenas. Esta fue una gran falencia, e igual sucede en la Agenda 2030. Y por eso creemos que a través de iniciativas como el ICRI y otros mecanismos podemos lograr avanzar en lo concreto, que es lo más importante. Estamos convencidos que si juntamos y articulamos este potencial de conocimiento milenario, técnico y científico de los pueblos indígenas en tantas áreas, estamos seguros que podemos concretar acciones estratégicas para resolver problemas como, por ejemplo, hablábamos la semana pasada, o hablaban los panelistas o aportaban el día 6 de julio, en el marco también del foro político ODS, de lograr soluciones y para prevenir desastres naturales, desde el conocimiento milenario de los pueblos indígenas, por no decir también ancestrales de los pueblos indígenas. Y creemos que si articulamos esos esfuerzos, seguramente a todos nos va a interesar, a todos nos conviene y podemos juntar, canalizar recursos, articulando también esfuerzos, hacer causa común y bolsa común, como decimos en mi pueblo indígena Inga, a la que pertenezco, el pueblo Inga de Colombia. En ese sentido, también hemos venido planteando como FILAC, lo planteamos en la 4ª conferencia sobre población y desarrollo llevada a cabo en Santiago de Chile hace pocos días, en el marco del consenso de Montevideo, la necesidad de establecer mecanismos de articulación desde los distintos sectores, la academia, el sector privado, el sector institucional y los pueblos indígenas. Creemos que en la medida que hagamos el esfuerzo y logremos esa articulación, vamos a poder avanzar. Así que yo quisiera invitar a todos y a todas los que estamos participando en este evento para que nos enfoquemos en esa línea. Cada quien hará sus aportes desde su misión, desde sus objetivos, desde sus propósitos, pero en la medida que sumemos esfuerzos, vamos a ir en camino y en ese sentido el ICRI creemos que es una excelente iniciativa y creemos que es un buen instrumento, una buena herramienta para poder avanzar y poder lograr concretar desde la perspectiva de los pueblos indígenas que las ODS y que la Agenda 21 sea un aporte histórico para la humanidad entera. Así que muchísimas gracias a todos los participantes y esperamos que esos planteamientos y estas reflexiones sean de buen recibo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miwe. My sincere apology, we are running very late with the time allocation to us. So we are still in the part 2 and we have another one part 2. So with this one, I'd like to move to the second issue of our part, which is the best practices and lessons learned in sustainable recovery planning in the Caribbean states. I'd like to invite Mr. Sami Elekat. Sami has been the passionate driver of this session that was being created, and I'm really grateful that he's leading this effort with Mr. Abdul Qadri from ECLAC. So Sami, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Melant. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly well.
All right, thank you so much. Actually, I'm very glad to join this session. I would like to start with thanking my colleagues from UNDESA and UNITAR for organizing the Learning Center during the high-level political forum. And for this particular session, many thanks to you, Meland, for the hard work and coordinating and organizing between so many players and bringing us together in a very timely session, myself and my colleague Abdul Kadri. I am a Sustainable Development Officer in the Division for Sustainable Development Goals, and our job is to support countries in advancing the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and its Sustainable Development Goals. Next. And I'm really glad to introduce my colleague, Abdul Kadri from ECLAC. Abdul and myself came together in this project to support the Caribbean countries in recovery and in sustainable recovery from the COVID-19 and make sure that we still advance in the direction of the Sustainable Development Goal. Abdul is the coordinator of the Statistics and the Social Development Unit of ECLAC, the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, and he's based in Port of Spain in Trinidad and Tobago. So with no more introductions, I think let's get to the subject of the issues. As Milan said, we have very short time. So actually, we started this project to support a number of countries in the Caribbean region so they can recover from the COVID-19. And the countries we started studying, including Antigua and Barbuda, Belize, Dominica, Trinidad, and Tobago, and the Commonwealth of Dominica. So we started looking at 5 countries, and we developed the research, and we shared this research with you, I believe. And it's about evaluating the impacts of COVID-19 and at the same time proposing recovery plans and how can we move forward in the right direction. Next. So just to focus on the findings of that report, we found out that for the Caribbean region, things can go around 12 transformative strategies that will help small SIDS recover in the right way and taking into account all the circumstances that face developing states, small island development states. Melan? So that means there have been actually a number of transformative strategies and policies that we found out it's relevant to that region. It's relevant to economic, to equality, to to social, and to environmental protection. Now, just by looking at the economic parts of the recovery, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Abdul to talk about the economic part of recovery in the Caribbean states. Abdul, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Fahmi and Milan, and all the participants at this learning session. It's a really great pleasure to be part of the session. And as Sami said, this is something that we've been working on with Caribbean countries, and he indicated the countries that we started with. And we have advanced in the study, but even within the context of implementing this project, what we know, and we've heard from the presentation on Colombia earlier today about the SDG financing, which is quite critical in the implementation of the SDGs. But we now have the COVID situation, a pandemic, which has really caused a lot of constraints, not only in the implementation of the SDG, but to sustainable development in general. But in the Caribbean, as is the case in most small island developing states, that the pandemic is just an added vulnerability. They already have pre-existing vulnerability. And in addressing this vulnerability, we need to talk about the issue of financing. But in implementing financing for development, we always talk about concessionary financing. But within the development framework, what we know is that concessionary financing has to do with the income level of countries, the GNI per capita. And most seats, particularly a number of Caribbean seats, middle to high income countries, and they are not eligible for concessionary financing. So within the context of COVID-19 recovery, now we now have to look at issue of innovative financing, which will be critical for implementing all this recovery project. So in the context of looking at recovery plan, then we have to address finance, and that is why this is important. And as we are actually having this session, there is a concurrent session going on, one of the main session of the HRPA, which is on MVI, the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, which the SEEDS member countries are discussing. And this is an issue that we have been dealing with within the context of the project as well, where we have to look at the different vulnerabilities. And how do we now incorporate these vulnerabilities? When we talk about financing, then we have to look beyond the traditional sources of financing, which we now have to talk about the innovative financing methods, which could include something like the Caribbean Resilience Fund, which ECLAC is currently promoting, and many of the participating countries that we have in this project are part of that, a target for this Caribbean Resilience Fund. And we also have gender bonds, which, for example, Antigua and Barbuda is really key in advancing that. And this is something that UN Women is also advancing. And there is a joint SDG fund project that is being implemented in the Caribbean. Many of the participating countries in this project are also part of that. And that focuses on empowering women in the businesses that are more gender-based businesses that are owned by women, and to advance the economic empowerment of women in the areas that are more climate sensitive, in green economies and so on and so forth. And we also have sustainability bonds that we can look at. But all of these innovative financing mechanisms are targeted at advancing the blue economy in the Caribbean. We know that the Caribbean is surrounded by oceans. And we have the green economy as well, in which we are trying to advance the sustainability, environmental sustainability, which tie to the economy. Orange economy, which is about the creative economy, as well as the silver economy, where we have an aging population, and health tourism is an area that is actually fast advancing in the Caribbean. So this is where I hand over back to Sami. Sami.
Thank you very much, Abdul. It's been really a pleasure to have this partnership between UNDESA and ECLAC and work on the Caribbean region. And at the same time, I really think what we are presenting right now can be taken to many parts of the world, as there are so many things in common between the Caribbean region and many countries, especially developing and least developed countries. So just one of the other things that came up is disaster risk management that need to be enhanced, and disaster risk financing and financial protection. These are issues that need to be enhanced a lot in the Caribbean region, so we can recover in the right way, and at the same time we can be prepared for future shocks and future natural and non-natural or man-made disasters. Now, the other issue was transforming education. And as we know that education has been affected a lot during the COVID-19, and many schools have to be closed, and not everyone had the means for digital communication, and so to continue education away from the classroom. So there is a big need for transformation when it comes to the education system, and has to get into the hybrid between the classroom and the digital transformation and the digital learning. Digital preparedness is another issue that most countries, actually all countries of the world, have to be prepared when it comes to data, when it comes to technology, when it comes to be prepared once people cannot communicate in the normal ways, and everything has to be done in a digital way. And as Abdul mentioned, this can be one of the items under the orange economy that is really can be helpful in recovering in the right direction, that focus on data and technology and creating jobs in those areas. Rethinking agriculture and food security, I think this issue came a number of times by previous speakers in this session. It's one of the most important things, and food transport and access to food has been affected during the COVID-19, and we need to be prepared when it comes to food security, and we need to understand the linkage between food and food production and the other areas of the economy. Sustainable tourism is one of the major contributors to the economy in most of the Caribbean states, and we need more work to ensure the sustainability and equity and environmentally responsible approaches to tourism. And at the same time, we want to make sure that tourism is connected to the other fields of work, and it can produce decent jobs, especially at the hard times. Now we come to this issue of integrated planning. And we have been talking actually about transforming and strategies to recover in the right direction. But this has to be planned together, and we have to use the integrated recovery planning. We know that there have been a lot of reversing of progress toward the national and the sustainable development goals. But at the same time, disaster and COVID-19 triggered economic stimulus packages for recovery. And it's good to make sure that we use those stimulus packages in the right direction, and not only for emergency response, but we use them for long-term planning. And that's where integrated recovery planning has to take place and have to be applied in this approach. And integrated planning has been one of the main components of the Sustainable Development Goals guidelines, and it also applies to the recovery planning, as we want to make sure that we understand the interlinkages between the different programs that we are doing. We want to understand where the leverage points of transformative change, where are those programs, once we work on them with limited resources, it can make difference and affect most of the other programs. And we want to make sure that those programs and strategies we are working on, they enhance each other, they reinforce each other rather than they contradict each other. Integration is about the horizontal integration and vertical integration. We want to make sure that the policies at the national level go all the way to the sub-level and to the local level. At the same time, we want to make sure that there is good coordination between the different government and non-government offices who are working on the SDGs and on certain programs and projects under the SDGs. We also want to make sure that there is good involvement of the stakeholders. And stakeholders, they have to be representative of all components of society. This is just a diagram that shows the process that we take in this integrated planning. Started with having a very clear objective about what we want to achieve, and involve and mobilize the stakeholders. We need to understand the connection and the linkages between the different programs we are having. We need to apply the backcasting process. It's just starting by the end of mind. We want to make sure what we want to be in the next 10 years, on the next 20 years, and what does it take us to get there. And when it comes to the implementation, we want to make sure it's a transformative implementation, that we are ready with the financial resources, we are ready with the technology, and we are ready with all the partnerships that's required. If we want to label integrated sustainable recovery in some terms, it has to be transformative, it has to be coherent and strategic, and it has to be robust and adaptive. What we mean by transformative, as I mentioned, since most countries, especially developing and least developed countries and small island development states, where there is limited resources and limited capacity. So once that's the case, especially from the financial side, we want to make sure that the programs we make and we start doing it help most of the other targets and objectives we want to achieve. And that's what we call it leverage points. It's those areas of work. If we start working on it, it will make positive difference in most of the other areas. The same thing with the policy options. Now, when it comes to coherence, we want to make sure that the policies we select, it just enforce each other and give color to the policies that each other when it comes to coherent and strategic. So at the same time, we want to understand what is the impact of each one of the programs we are doing, what is how much we can achieve, and what's the reliability of that program. Then we have to be selective, as we see in the diagram there. Look at the top and left part of the matrix, and those programs in the green color, those are the ones we need to focus on. This is just to explain the methodology of integrated planning in a very quick way, but we have actually developed a lot of tools and methodologies to explain how things can be done at the national level and at the local level too. Robustness, this is something we need to be prepared for. We want policies that work under different circumstances. And when we are facing some disasters or shocks, we want to make sure that those programs can still function. And that's what we mean by robustness. So just one more time, I think we want to apply the integrated recovery planning and policy coherence to countries. So we want to make sure that we recover in the right direction. And that's the direction of the Sustainable Development Goals. We want to make sure that we pick up policies that are transformative, coherent, and strategic, and robust and adaptive. So this is just in a quick way, like overview of the projects and what we are doing in the Caribbean region. And at the same time, what we are doing there, as I said, it can be transferred to other countries. I would like also to say that in this short period of time, at least we managed to explain what we are doing to the audience, and we look forward to more cooperation with other countries and other partners so we can move forward in the recovery and sustainable recovery and build more resilience in most countries. So we are prepared for future shocks, and we want to make sure we are in the direction of the Sustainable Development Goals. So I will stop here and give it back to my colleague, Milind. Milind, back to you.
Thank you very much, Sammy. This has been, as you said, it's a complete comprehensive course, and I'm sure the participants can find more information on those documents and the links that you shared in the concept note, which is on the website, and they can access the details of this complete course that you mentioned. So with this one, I'd like to go to the last part of this session, which is we are way behind time on how to, the most critical part is the community participation. And this is something articulated by our good friend, Mr. Harrison Noko, who is the executive president of the AJESH in Cameroon. So Harrison, floor to you. Harrison?
Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I know it's been a long day, and I hope are you getting me?
Yes, we can hear you perfect well.
Okay. This session, if I can share my screen.
I have the screen share already, so I think we can continue maybe, or I can stop this share. Or I can stop and you can pick up.
Okay. It would be nice if I pick up.
Okay, I will stop sharing then. Please go ahead.
Okay, so we are in a system where we have to push sustainable development goals to its peak, and like one of the speakers said, we need to get everybody on board. We have to involve everybody, and if we have to move on, the communities should not be left behind. We keep talking about the vulnerable, the less privileged, but all of them are within the community. So we'll be having two panelists on this part, and the first panelist is Dr. James Ayamba, and you have a traditional ruler who will also be presenting how far they have gone with community participation and what he thinks should be should be his approach, or what they have been doing, and he thinks should be part of the way we should involve communities. And in doing this, I want to start by emphasizing on the idea of inclusive development involving communities is now higher in most agendas, especially the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals since September 2015. And we also got to understand that in order for us to, we keep talking of communities, what are we really referring to as communities? We define communities as those who are beneficiaries and partners of any sustainable development process. Communities are also destinations for sustainable economic development and include urban and rural communities in all countries. We've been talking of technologies, we're talking of financing, we're talking of digital technology, but all of this has to do with communities. And you have two sets of communities. You have the indigenous communities and you have the local communities. And this set of persons are those that we need to really much involve. And so we have to take care of communities once as a safe, comfortable, and pristine environment that can be enjoyed by all. We all belong to communities. Yes.
Can you put the screen full screen, presentation mode?
Oh, it's not in presentation mode?
No, please.
Oh, this is tricky.
Just press F5 or F6.
Just a minute, let me see. So what should I do? I should press
PowerPoint presentation mode.
Okay.
It's okay. Go ahead otherwise.
But are you seeing the screen? Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes, we can see the screen, but not the full, this presentation mode, That's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, let me, just a minute, please, if you permit me.
Sure.
Okay. Are you seeing it now?
Perfect. Perfect.
Okay. So, like I was saying, so for communities to be effectively involved in the recovery, planning, and transformation process, governments and development agents should engage and take informed decisions considering the bottom-up information systems with effective consideration of free, prior, and informed consent. So if we have to raise finances, we have to involve digital technology, the communities should be very much involved, both in the urban and rural sector. So in this, the question now goes, why is it important for communities to involve communities in countries' implementation of their sustainable development strategies? And how should communities be engaged? So with these questions, I will give the floor to the first panelist, who is Dr. James, who will expatiate a bit on this. So Dr. James is a community participatory mapping coordinator for Cameroon project on community participatory mapping, and he is also a forest specialist. So I'll hand the floor to Dr. James. Dr. James, over.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Harrison. Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening.
James, you have a echo behind you. Please, I think you have two devices at the same time.
Okay.
Try to mute the other device, James, if you have two devices.
And I would request both of you if you can be as short as possible.
Okay. Okay. I'll be talking on how Harrison, please, can you move? Okay. It's very important to involve communities in the implementation of SDGs goal, because it guarantees sustainable economic development. And when one speaks of community participation in development, it's expected that communities will be included in development. Harrison?
Go ahead.
Please, can you continue?
Yes, I've changed the slide. Hello, James, are you getting?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Communities, it's very important to integrate communities because first, they act as a catalyst for expanding social and economic opportunities, which in turn uplift the quality of life. It also gives the local people a sense of belonging, and it also gives them the ability to take ownership of the project. It's also a prospect of building social network amongst the local people, community, and stakeholder, which is one of the major conflicts we are facing in Cameroon. Communities can be engaged through the FP process, which is the free, prior, informed process. Free without any pressure and intimidation. Prior, which is performed before the activity that affects the community is undertaken, and informed with the possession of full and accurate knowledge about the activity and its impact on the community, and consent, community permission is either accept or withheld. Harrison, can you continue? To engage community, we have 4 stages. The precondition, this is where preliminary studies is being done on the people, the forest, ownership situation, and the potential impact of the project. And also socialization materials are also prepared, like community engagement material and discussion with the communities. Then we move to entering the engagement in the village. Yeah, we identify key persons. We identify key persons and all the social group within the community, and we ensure that they are represented. And the next stage, which is the decision making, it should be very inclusive stage, where all the components of the community are represented, and the community people should be given the opportunity to share their views. And if the project is not unanimous, is not agreed by the community, it should be redone, or a participatory process should be done to set aside what is conflictual. And if the project is accepted by the community, then the community people should sign the engagement letter and the implementation be done. Harrison, please. Community can be organized. For communities to truly benefit from recovery and development, they need to be organized. This is key, especially as resources are often communally owned. Organized communities are better able to achieve community goals and vision. They are in better position to receive funding from donor agencies and other government people. They are also better equipped to be engaged, involved, to benefit from economic development. I think
thank you, James, Dr. James. So we've heard how communities can really be engaged. We've seen how communities should be engaged, and the importance of engaging communities if we have to attain sustainable development goals. We need to blend all of this with the digital technology and all of that. And all that we have to raise has to do with financial capabilities, financial raising finances, and making sure that the different goals are attained at the different levels in the communities. We will now move to the last panelist for this part, and he is a traditional ruler, His Majesty Tutu Ebenezer. He will be speaking in French. He will just give his experience as a traditional ruler and how they get involved and how they have been involved with partnering with donors, partnering with government in making sure that some of the sustainable development goals are attained. I'll give the floor to His Majesty Chief Tutu. He will be expressing himself in French, and I'll give a resume of his presentation after he must have been concluded. His Majesty, it's your turn.
Okay, thank you, Aris. Merci beaucoup, Aris. Bonjour à tous les panélistes, à tous les participants. Bien que chez nous, ici, c'est la nuit, mais bien, bonjour. Je remercie l'opportunité qui m'est offerte pour parler de l'association, notre association active dans ce forum. C'est quoi Actif? C'est une association qui regroupe 52 communautés villageoises riveraines de tout le massif forestier qu'on appelle forêt des Baux. Alors, sa particularité, c'est que cette association est représentée par les chefs traditionnels qui représente chacun sa communauté villageoise. Nous nous sommes donnés comme objectif de veiller à la préservation de notre patrimoine ancestral par une gestion participative et rationnelle de nos ressources pour un bon développement durable. Alors, il y a la situation qui prévaut actuellement, avant que nous entrions dans l'action, c'est que les communautés se trouvent imposées des projets sans les consulter, sans leur avis et sans leur consentement. Et je prends pour exemple, dans l'exploitation forestière actuelle, en dehors de l'exploitation sauvage, l'État envoie des exploitants forestiers dans les communautés sans que les villageois, sans que les communautés soient informés, sans qu'on leur demande leur avis. Voilà un cas patent. Il y a également des projets sociaux tels que construction des salles de classe dans des villages alors qu'on a plutôt besoin des adductions d'eau ou on a plutôt besoin des centres de santé. Mais on apporte à la place des salles de classe alors qu'il n'y a pas assez d'effectifs pour ces classes-là. Voilà des cas réels. Donc, qu'est-ce que nous avons donc convenu de faire au niveau de notre association active? C'est que nous veillons à l'implication des membres des communautés de toute catégorie sociale et les placer au cœur de tout projet de développement depuis sa conception jusqu'à la réalisation, de faire respecter les étapes de processus d'implémentation de tout projet de développement, à savoir la sensibilisation des communautés sur leur importance dans l'implication à tout projet de développement durable. Il y a également l'implication des communautés à l'identification de leurs besoins, aider à la conception des projets avec la participation des populations. Au minimum, 80% des populations doivent être représentées dans toutes ces participations, dans tous ces projets. Nous avons également la formation des communautés sur le droit des communautés au consentement libre, informé et préalable, qui en abrégé CLIP, et sur les concessions forestières, parce que beaucoup de populations sont ignorantes de tout cela. C'est pour ça que l'État, sachant qu'on est ignorant, ils envoient des forestiers sans les consulter. Accroître les compétences des populations dans leur domaine d'excellence et impliquer les communautés à la réalisation des projets et des activités en liaison avec les objectifs de développement durable. Nous avons également la création d'un comité de suivi dont les membres sont issus des communautés afin de garantir une appropriation de ces projets. Mais tout cela ne se fait pas sans faire face à des défis. Il y a des défis auxquels nous faisons face. Il y a par exemple les défis, que les populations, les communautés ont pour s'engager à tout ceci à cause d'une mauvaise collaboration des responsables administratifs, à cause de la faiblesse de la structure traditionnelle même, qui est totalement inféodée ou contrôlée par l'administration. Il y a, par exemple, la conscience insuffisante de l'évolution de la technologie numérique et la nécessité de suivre la tendance des événements. Nous citons également les ressources financières limitées pour renforcer l'autonomie des chaufferies, les conflits entre les autorités traditionnelles, d'une part, et entre communautés intercommunautaires, d'autre part. Mais nous allons dire en guise de conclusion que notre objectif majeur, en conclusion, c'est que ACRIF a pour ambition d'être un observateur de veille et d'encadrement, d'être un lobby auprès des pouvoirs publics et des institutions dans la réalisation et la concrétisation des objectifs de développement durable dans la réalisation et la concrétisation des objectifs durables de développement durable. Je ne vais pas manquer de demander pour finir que nous souhaitons, nous sommes intéressés par une participation en présentiel à des conférences pour présenter physiquement aux participants nos activités et les efforts que nous fournissons sur le terrain, nous les chefs traditionnels, que nous déployons en collaboration avec nos populations pour atteindre les objectifs de développement durable et l'agenda 2030. Voilà globalement en courant comment est-ce que nous nous organisons. Je crois que j'ai pu me faire entendre et comprendre. Merci beaucoup pour votre attention bienveillante.
Thank you very much, His Royal Highness. Melin, with your permission, let me just give a resume of
Yes,
what His Royal Highness presented. So His Royal Highness started by presenting his an association that they have created, which is called Association of Traditional Rulers around a protected area in the Ebo Forest Reserve. And these traditional rulers formed this association because of conflicting developmental projects that come in their communities. And by so doing, it raises more conflict it creates more conflict than development. So they formed, Melin, you are the one flipping the slides.
Yes, I'm just concluding the last part. Go ahead.
Yeah, please, so that I can see what I'm. Just move on. Let me proceed to his presentation, please.
One second, hold on.
So,
okay, 1 second.
Continue. Again. Continue, please. Write down.
This is the last slide.
You have gone right to the end of it, and so again, come again. The previous, okay. So come again to the other slide. So this association that they have created is to push the sustainable development agendas in their communities, and they think that this association is made up of over 52 traditional rulers involving their communities. So in doing this, they think that they will easily help in carrying out developmental programs in their communities. So the rules of this association is to make sure that they do effective monitoring of sustainable development programs in their communities, make sure that every program respects the norms and traditional rules in their villages. They also help to make sure that communities are effectively sensitized and informed with respect to this project. They're looking at the elements of support, acting as the linkages in developmental programs and making sure that everyone is involved, including women, youth, and men. Proceed, please. So they are also looking at elements of free, prior, informed consent. Most of these are some of the activities that we've done with them, training them on how their consent should be sought when it comes to community development. They are looking at increasing population knowledge on other things and making sure that the agendas of sustainable development goals are effectively implemented in their communities. They are looking at also participating actively in multi-stakeholder discussions on issues of development, especially when it has to do with community development. Please proceed. And he says that all of this cannot be attained without some challenges. They have some challenges like elements of poor collaborations amongst themselves, traditional rulers. You have elements of poor collaborations amongst the traditional rulers, communities, and the administration, who tend to impose things on them. They have issues of problems of structuralization of their institutions. They have elements of insufficient insufficient knowledge on the evolution of technology. Like we've been talking about technology and digital technology and the rest. They think that communities need to be very much informed and trained on that. So he's also looking at challenges like financial insufficiency and conflicts amongst traditional rulers and amongst communities. So he concludes by saying that their association, ACTRIF, they're looking at a firm and strong associations and looking at spreading to making sure that other communities should be this strong, and at the same time be as watchdog in making sure that sustainable development goals are effectively implemented when it has to do with projects in their communities. They're also looking at lobbying at public levels or public institutions to make sure that these goals are attained. And above all, his plea is that they, as traditional rulers and communities, their voices should be heard at both national and international conferences. And one of it is talking about, like, we brought him on board for this to present in this session. He thinks that as others have been participating, they would gladly like to participate in presenting how they are implementing sustainable development goals and attending Agenda 2030. So on this note, this is the end of our session, and I want to thank you all for your kind attention.
So, Harrison, thank you for this thing. We would like to take the last part of this program, which is the very quick summary of the discussion that we had so far in the 3 parts. So I'd like to take less than 60 seconds for each one. Valentina, I would like to invite you first, very quickly, within 60 seconds, if you can provide the outcome from the first part, please.
Yes, thank you, Milind. Okay, for us, our outcome is that the proposal of consolidate an integrated financial strategy for SDG has to be motivated, but get a better leadership and institutional coordination among different decisions maker in the country, and improving the capacity of the government to manage the financing flows to direct all these to the SDGs. Also, this strategy has also to emphasize creating a space for discussion with the private sector and also with international cooperation and civil society, and also to move all the financing flows and to promote the SDG. We also want to share that is really important, like the construction of an integrated financing strategy that also can contribute with the relationship between all the actors and the decision makers, and to make the configuration of the conditions for this framework with transparency, accountability, and have to the ability to the channel financial resources. So I think those will be. Thank you very much for the time and for the session, and we hope to see you. Yeah,
absolutely. We'll compile this into the formal report, the outcome, Valentina.
Yes, thank you very much.
So I would give you very briefly in 60 seconds what we accomplished into the second half of the second part, which is on the IKRI. Our colleague Dr. Shirish Ravan, he presented how the understanding of the IKRI objective, especially in terms of the key thing was Dr. Mirna Cunningham. She presented the challenges and the opportunities, especially in terms of how we create, I mean, what is the need and how we need to ensure the capture and process this knowledge. Then we had the also critical contribution from Jessica and Mr. Miguel, how we contribute those indigenous, especially the youth, and engaging those stakeholders into the process. And finally, we had Professor Marqueza from the Philippines giving the engagement strategy in terms of the methodology and especially the case study from the Philippines, how students compiling, and she invited those interested to join, they can participate. She's looking for interns and those to join the research community. Finally, I would like to take the second part, which was presented very eloquently by Sami and Abdullah. So I'd like to invite either of you to very quickly in 60 seconds provide the outcome from Sami or Abdullah, one of you. Sami, are you there?
Yes. Thank you very much. I'm very glad to talk on behalf of the outcome of part 2.2, which is about building back better towards the sustainable development goals. And I think we managed to overview with the audience, although in a very brief way, our effort that included UNDESA and ECLAC coming together in the Caribbean region and support countries to help them in developing sustainable recovery plans that help them reverse the impacts of COVID-19 and to move in the right direction, which is the direction of the Sustainable Development Goals. We emphasized we identified 12 transformative strategies that could have been very helpful to countries in the Caribbean region, and we think that many of them can be applied to other regions. At the same time, we overviewed the methodology of the integrated recovery planning methods that include having a very concrete objective in mobilizing stakeholders, having good analysis of the connections between the different programs, and selecting policies that in harmony with each other and make sure that implementation happen in a transformative way. So this is from our end, my friend Milan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sami. This is, again, as I said, most of the information will be made available on the website, both the report as well as this concept document. Finally, I would like to invite Harrison to, within 60 seconds, if you can give the outcome for the third part of your contribution.
Yeah, at the outcome, we are looking at the importance and the need to effectively involve indigenous people, local communities in the attainment of the SDGs at the era of building forward better in primordial and heightened the interest of parties and other stakeholders in decision making. We're also looking at the SDGs are realized in multi-stakeholder participation approaches in countries with no one left behind, not even the indigenous nor the local communities. We think that if they are effectively involved, the society will move ahead and will have a better world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Harrison. I would like to see if there has been some hands has been raised. We are almost 60 minutes over the time. I wanted to give the very closing remarks, but if Leah allows, I would request who is raising the hands if you want very quickly to add something to this program from the participants. We welcome, I'm just trying to see how to allow them the floor. Leah, is there a way?
Milind, sorry,
yes?
Unfortunately, we would be so over time, we're not, if you can just proceed with the closing remarks, we have no time for interactions. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I'd like to conclude this session. Again, thank you for the opportunity, UNITAR, for developing this session, part of the HLPF 2022. On behalf of all the partners who co-organizer of this session, I would like to thank you, everyone, especially the National Development Planning of Colombia, PHILAC, which is our partner, UNOSA, UNDESA, ECLAC, AJESH, and all those who helped make this session possible. Especially thanks to the colleague from UNITAR and UNDESA. And this recording and the presentation will be made available to everyone. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. It has been really quite session.
Yes, indeed, it's a marathon session, and I'm really grateful that we were managed to, even though we are very beyond time limit, for Pirayo and for all the colleagues. Thank you for your patience and understanding. And we apologize again for the delay.
Thank you for the coordination.
Yes, welcome.
Sam, it's nice seeing you. Michelle Abdul, I said to you words.
Good to see you. Good to see you. It has been a long time. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good.
Thank you so much. As I said, actually, Milan managed. He did excellent coordination, and he brought us all together in this marathon session.
Yeah.
Job well done, Milan. Amazing.
Oh, thank you. We should thank actually Pelayo and Leah and Reem, all those who really made this, brought us together. So Valentina, I guess you and your team from Colombia, this has been a really very unique experience, and we hope that you will remain engaged with this IKRI and our community with Sammy and all of us.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I give it to Leah and yes, Pelayo, if you, as the host, to conclude or to switch off the session.
Yes, with this we conclude session 8. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining.